Had an awesome question come through on the channel from one of our channel members asking about warm-ups. Do we actually have to do them? What's involved in a warm-up, and why do we need to do a warm-up if it's necessary for that activity? So in today's video, we're breaking down everything to do with warm-ups prior to getting into your training session or getting into your race. Hey, welcome back to the channel. Nick here, making sports science simple. And in this video, we're talking all about warm-ups prior to your training session or potentially you jumping into a race. An interesting question we had in the comments on a previous video up here on the channel, asking all about, is a warm-up necessary? Particularly if we can just get into a session and we can just ease into it sometimes, is that enough? So what I wanted to cover off is, first and foremost, why do we do a warm-up? Or what is the purpose of a warm-up? And it's kind of a little bit in the name. A warm-up in itself is there to increase our body temperature. That's the warm part of it. Our body likes to be at a little warmer temperature, particularly when it's cold, but even when it is hot outside, we do need to get things like blood flow happening, what we call our acute responses increasing. So heart rate needs to be on the rise, our ventilation needs to be up. Like I said, our blood flow needs to be pumping around the system, and ultimately, what does that lead to? It leads to a bit of distribution of oxygen around the system, blood around the system. That's going to lead to the muscles warming up as well. And that puts us in a prime position to be able to go into a session and maximize our output. If you ever feel like you've jumped into particularly high intensity sessions or any session in general, and you feel like there's a bit of a lag period at the beginning, you're sort of feeling a bit lethargic, it might be because you're not completely warmed up and getting those processes going. Could be as a result of potential fatigue, but likely if you're feeling fresh and ready to go, it's because you haven't done a good enough job of getting these acute responses up to the level they need to be. So we're minimizing that gap between rest and the activity bout, but also getting things prepared from a physiological perspective and getting nice and warm, ready to go. So ideally, what is the purpose of doing all this stuff? Well, it's to prevent a little bit of the risk of injury, predominantly in high intensity sessions. And that's where my tip in terms of when to do a warm-up and when it is absolutely critical you do one really comes down to where our greatest risk of injury in our training or maybe our competition. Obviously, we want to be as prepared and ready to go. We want to avoid that lethargic sort of start to a race. So we're definitely going to do a warm-up prior to an event. Are we going to do it in our high intensity interval sessions? Absolutely as well. Anything that I class high intensity could be anything basically above your zone 2. Anytime you're going out and doing something where you're pushing reasonably hard, probably more than a 5 out of 10 difficulty, you really want to be doing a warm-up to make sure you're prepared for that bout of activity, because the higher the intensity we go, typically there is a slightly higher risk in terms of injury if we're not prepared for that activity. If we are well prepared and we've gone through and done our warm-up and we've sort of gotten ourselves ready to produce that output, you're more than likely going to be fine and ready to go and sort of handle any little twists and turns that come along the way. Classic one might be just getting the ankles warm if you're going out for a trail run, going and doing some pogo type jumps. I'm getting into specifics in a moment, but bouncing up and down your ankles, doing some little change of direction might then prepare you better for if you do roll your ankle on a rock or a tree branch if you're out on a trail. Well, you're just going to handle that a little bit better because the muscles and the tendons and your joints are all ready to go and sort of, I guess, bracing for that to an extent rather than just getting straight into it and going, well, not ready, not prepared for it, ankle rolls over and we do some serious damage. So that's a really key example of when we need to be doing a warm-up. Can we just ease into some of our sessions? Well, yes, we can, but I tend to reserve that more so for when it's much more low intensity. So we're talking low zone 2 type work, but I'd still recommend not just getting straight into, all right, I'm going to go sit on 150 beats per minute from the gun. I'm going to spend 10 to 15 minutes of gradually building. It might be the first couple of Ks of an hour's worth of activity, where you're slowly building that intensity to your desired level, whether it be heart rate or pace base, and then you can move on for the rest of the session. So easing into it is appropriate in the low intensity, but definitely go and do a dedicated session in that dedicated warm-up component to your session when the intensity is up. And like I said, any moment you feel like you might be at a greater risk of injury in that session if you didn't do one, that's an alarm bell to say I need to be going and doing a comprehensive warm-up before I get started. In terms of what to do, this is the last thing I'm going to cover, and what do I do, or what do I recommend for a warm-up? It's already very well to say go and do one, but what should we be doing? Warm-ups follow a very similar pattern to how our general preparation or annual training plan looks. We start very general and broad, and we progressively get more and more specific until we're ready to go. And that's the case for our warm-up. We start very broad. You're just trying to get, like I said, some of your blood flow moving around the system, increase your heart rate, increase your ventilation, your respiratory rate, etc. Try and get some processes happening, get a bit of muscle temperature in. So this general component might last for say 5-10 minutes, depending on how long you need to get yourself going, particularly really cold mornings here in Melbourne coming into winter, you might need to do a little bit more. And this can be anything you like. If you're going out for a run, let's say you're going and doing some running-based intervals, you might jump on the bike indoors for 10 minutes just to get yourself generally warm before heading outside and doing some more specific prep. You might want to do some skipping with a skipping rope. That's a really good one in terms of the plyometric nature, getting the ankles, the calves, the Achilles ready to go for some of that high intensity, springy type action from a running side of things. You might go and just do 10 minutes of, or 5 to 10 minutes of gradually increasing the intensity up to a sort of moderate to high heart rate. Maybe you build yourself up to sort of just sub-threshold from a heart rate perspective very gradually. You might ease in that way. That's the general part of it to get those basic processes happening. The specific part then needs to be tacked on. And what do I mean by specific part? This really depends on what type of session you're doing, what type of sport you're in, and what type of athlete you are as well. But some of those specific activities could be things like I mentioned before, something like a pogo jump. It's basically like almost a similar pattern to when you've got a skipping rope and you're bouncing up on your toes, either one double leg and or single leg. That might be a really specific action if you're going in and doing some running-based efforts, for example. If you're jumping on the bike, maybe you're going to do some you might do some single leg squats, some lunges, things like that to really get the quads happening and really, get the muscle temperature up, but also that nervous system activation if you're doing some high power output on the bike. In extreme cases, there's actually some good literature to show that you might want to go and lift some weights before you do some of those really high intensity bike efforts and really explosive power efforts. I'm not going to go too much into that, but there's some different things you can do in and around that are going to make it really, really specific prep. And ideally, this specific prep is trying to prepare you for the movements that you're associated with. If you're a team sport athlete or like what I do with my football umpiring, I'm going to do some change of direction. Maybe if you're a trail runner, that's applicable to you. Like I said before, getting the ankles working, the knees working in different planes of motion, dodging and weaving stuff. Maybe that's an important thing to add into your warm-up that you may not have considered before. The obvious one is to do things like building strides or building efforts. And I definitely recommend this as a must-do for any type of athlete, whether you're a cyclist, a rower, a triathlete, runner, whatever it might be. Doing some building efforts. You don't have to do many, maybe 5 or 6, where you're gradually just getting up to at and ideally just above the working intensity of the main part of your session. So what I mean by that is maybe 15-second or 30-second little burst efforts with plenty of recovery, 60 to 90 seconds recovery afterwards, just to get you prepared so you've experienced the actual main session intensity or just above it once, twice, maybe even 3 times before you get into the main set. So what that looks like for me is if I'm doing VO2 intervals, I might do 2-minute efforts, 2 minute on, 2 minute off in the session, and let's say I'm trying to run those at 3:20 pace. So what do I do? In my stride throughs, I'm going to do a couple of strides, maybe 15 or 20 seconds in length at 3:20 pace or just a bit quicker, just so I've got that in my legs all ready to go. So I hit that first effort at basically 100% preparedness. I'm not going in and lagging through the first 30 seconds. I can hit that 3:20 as soon as I start my first effort, which is not only going to prepare us from an injury preventative perspective and get ready for the session, but it's going to help us enhance that bang for buck nature of the session by making sure that when we are working in our on time, we're getting all of that on time. We're not just getting the back end of it, that first 1 or 2 intervals. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea in terms of what I think about warm-ups, when they're applicable, when they're not, what are they trying to achieve, and the overall aims of warm-up, and some ideas around what to add in as part of that warm-up process, building from general through to that more specific prep, and ultimately trying to get a taste of that main session intensity in there before you get into the main block of your training. Always interested to hear what you do. I know everyone's quite individual with how they like to go about their warm-up process, so please leave a comment down below. What do you do in your warm-up? Maybe even list out your warm-up protocol. Let's compare and contrast them between people watching these videos. Interested to see the different ideas and the different things you try or like to do in your warm-up. Maybe we can share a few things across. Maybe we can improve some of your warm-up protocols as well. So leave some messages down in the comments below. Always look forward to reading those. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for watching this one, and we'll see you in the next one.